A friend one day would challenge me, you guys talk about poverty, but you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, what do you mean? In my country, we're poor, but we're not really poor. And said, what do you mean? Well, the people I think are really poor and desperate, miserable, are people who don't have friends. I realized, wow. Now my vision of what poverty is being expanded here. But long story short, that guy who hated business people, who thought that development cannot be done, I saw a way through a grassroots movement that was helping people through relationships, identifying their needs, that made a bigger difference than billions of dollars handouts. And the type of help that was provided was like, in your community, you realize that that lady is a widower now. She doesn't have Social Security. She doesn't have a job. She cannot, survive, and she was getting handouts out of these profits. And because of relationships, people realized that she had some talent, which was she was a seamstress. So the best way to help her moving forward is probably give her also buying her a sewing machine. And we realized that what was better, giving her money or giving her a sewing machine? And long story short, she started a little business. She got herself out of misery. She didn't need the handouts anymore. And one thing I learned in this, was one important lesson is I was taught in school that you cannot just hand a fish out to people to help. You got to teach people how to fish. But I learned through these years that handing out a fish still is not or teaching people how to fish is still not good enough, because you need to fish with them. Otherwise, you end up sometimes thinking you're helping, but you're not helping because you're not meeting the real needs, as we talked before, the various forms of poverty, because you don't know this person well enough. And so I want to launch a challenge here that I believe that a lot of poverty we see out there is a problem of relationships, of broken relationships. At all levels, we talked about a family being one major source of relationships. But I've also discovered that the business can be a formidable place of encounters, of building relationships, can be relations of a communion, with your employees, with the people you serve as customers, with the interns that you coach, with the businesses you patronage around you in an organization, with the poor that you help with some of your profits, etc. It is, for me, it was a discovery. And I cannot believe I'm the same guy who hated business people, and I feel that I'm changing the world every day through business. And so that's my vocation. Just want to share that with you.
Nick, thanks so much for your perspective. It's beautiful. We have a whole, when we chose the speakers, we made sure there's a whole variety of Catholic approaches to business and to poverty eradication. And apropos poverty, recently this movie came out. It's called Poverty, Inc. It's produced by Acton Media. And the director of the movie is actually here. It's Michael Miller. And Michael is is a colleague and friend of mine from the Acton Institute, and he was, as I said, the director and host of Poverty, Inc. and several other wonderful documentaries and movies they made. The Call of the Entrepreneur and The Birth of Freedom are some of the great movies that they make. I think of Michael Miller as a Renaissance man, actually. Today he comes here as the man who just researched in over 40 countries what's up with poverty, with our efforts to eradicate poverty, and he will talk a bit about this. But this is a man who is as fluent in Aristotle, Hayek, and John Paul II as he is in Spanish and Japanese. So I'm always impressed, Michael, by your versatility and by your commitment to what you do. He's husband to Rebecca, and father of 6 children, the latest of which is going to be born in June. Michael Miller.
Thank you, Andreas, for that kind introduction. I'd like to thank you all more, but I already got the sign, my time's up. So Andreas asked us to talk about Catholic social teaching, John Paul and Centesimus Annus, and the impact on our thinking, including people from the peripheries. And so I think the first, perhaps the main influence of John Paul II that shaped my thinking on inclusion for the poor doesn't actually come from Centesimus Annus or any of the encyclicals, although it makes its way through. It comes from the opening chapter of Karol Wojtyła's book, Love and Responsibility, where he makes the difference between subjects and objects. It's like, if you've read this book, it's the most excruciating chapter. But But really that human beings are subjects. We are created in the image of God as a subject. And so we often treat poor people like objects. We treat poor people like objects of our charity, objects of our pity, objects of our compassion, instead of treating poor people like subjects and the protagonists of their own story of development. Now, I mean subjects not as subjects to the king, but in grammar. So Frank talked about quadratic equations. I'm going to talk about grammar school. Okay, so that is another I, and that we are supposed to be in intersubjective relationships. Well, then we mix this kind of objectification of the poor with humanitarianism. Now, I make the distinction between humanitarianism and charity. So humanitarianism is a hollowed-out, secular vision of Christian love, of caritas, that has limited horizons. It stops at merely providing comfort. And it doesn't seek the good of the other, right? Because Christian love is this intensio benevolentia, this desire and will of the good for the other person. Well, then we take humanitarianism and combine it with technocratic social engineering. And we turn the developing world into a lab for experiments by upper middle class experts. But poor people are not objects, and the developing world is not a lab for experiments. Mary Eberstadt noted this already. John Paul II says that the primary fault of socialism is anthropological in nature, and this same fault is just as potent in the modern technocracy, which manifests itself in lots of ways that other speakers have talked about, but it also manifests itself in the way we address poverty in the developing world. We move people around and we treat them like experiments. Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, Cardinal Ratzinger wrote, Marxism was only the radical execution of an ideological concept that even without Marxism largely determines the signature of our age. And so we see this, Michael Novak talked about the problems of pornography, we see it in marriage, we see this objectification of persons. And so that has really been probably the driving force in thinking about the poor and poor people, and really of that film, which is, by the way, for secular general audiences, but is driven by this concept of John Paul. The second one relates to what Max and Nick have just talked about, in that in paragraph 32 of Centesimus Annus, he talks about, as Nick mentioned, that the decisive factor in life today in capital and market economies is not so much land, but man himself. But then in paragraph 33, he continues and he says there are risks here. Many do not have the means to participate. Many people are excluded. There's no way for them to enter into networks. Following a little bit on the fish, there's teach a man to fish, give a man a fish. Well, actually, for most poor people, the problem is they don't have access to the pond, right? And I remember somebody told me that. I thought, that's exactly right. Poor people are fundamentally excluded, and then they become a burden. And as John Paul mentions in that paragraph, then we try to eradicate them through coercive forms of demographic control. So when we look at poverty and exclusion, sometimes we look at the developing world and we see, all right, what should we do? And our first instinct is, okay, infrastructure, healthcare, education. We have that here, we're going to provide that there. Now, of course, these things are very important. But generally speaking, education, infrastructure, and healthcare are the result of wealth before they become the cause of it. And that underlying this exclusion are more fundamental things that we see throughout the Hebrew Bible all the way through modern Catholic social teaching throughout Rerum Novarum. And I don't have time to go into them in detail, but a couple of them I think that we sometimes neglect, and that the development establishment has really neglected, are three key things that I would call the institutions of justice. The first is clear title to land, right? In some countries, 50-60% of the land has no title. If you don't know who owns the land, it's very hard. You're not going to take risks. And if you're a widow or you're an orphan, it can be easily taken away from you. I interviewed a Ghanaian entrepreneur. He said he was talking to the World Bank. He said, look, without private property, we can't build businesses. He said, you've been working here 50 years. What, you just forgot? We don't have land? Problem? So this is, I think, something that's important. But I do want to say that property is absolutely essential for economic inclusion and for economic growth. But even if it weren't, it would still be very important, because it creates the conditions for human flourishing. It creates the space for families to live out their freedom and their responsibility. So even if it were not economically efficient, it would be important, but it is. And I think it's also important to religious liberty. And so we already heard talks on religious liberty, but where is it that religion, culture is primarily passed down? Not in the homily, it's passed down in the family. And so if you look at, say, the socialist view of family, it sees three primary obstacles to socialist reform: private property, religion, and this present form of marriage. And so private property is an essential part of economic growth, but it's also broadly understood for human flourishing. And then really quickly, the second is access to justice in the courts. In the Center for Research in India did a study. It takes an average of 20 years to get your court case heard, and it costs a lot of money. If you're poor, if you're a widow, if you're an orphan, you are excluded. Many of you know the study by Hernando de Soto, where he set up a little business, and he got 4 lawyers to work every day, taking public transportation, just like a poor person, to set up their business. It took 289 days. The legal systems are unfriendly to poor people. And then the final thing, and I'll end, is this idea of free exchange. Now, sometimes you think, wait, doesn't free exchange hurt the poor? And it can. But when an economy becomes highly regulated, who do you think writes the regulation? Big business, powerful interest groups, and entrenched bureaucracies. And the poorest of the poor lack the political, economic, and social contacts to navigate the system that's dominated by this bureaucracy. So, we often hear religious leaders or political leaders saying poor people are dominated by markets. That is not true. Poor people are excluded from markets. They are dominated by crony capitalism. And, we also hear religious leaders and political leaders and celebrities saying, if North Americans were more generous, we could raise, do I sound like a celebrity? We could raise $84 billion and we could eradicate extreme poverty forever. And the answer is no, we couldn't. Because poor people are not poor primarily because they lack stuff. Poor people are poor primarily because they are excluded from the institutions of justice that enable them to create prosperity in their own families and their own communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. The movie is called Poverty, Inc. It's now on Amazon.
iTunes?
And on iTunes, the whole thing. But we're not making any commercial here. Poverty, Inc.
Get your copy today.
Get your copy today. Today, as we put this day together, we wanted to show practical examples as well today. And I think starting with Iqbal this morning, with Christopher, you started to see things being applied. How do you apply Catholic social doctrine in the marketplace? We saw it with Frank again earlier. And then Nick gave us an example. That's how he went into business, with the Catholic social doctrine. Somebody who inspires me ever since I met him about how he does that is Duncan Taylor. For all the students who are here, he has a brilliant way of, the important thing in business is to be able to say, what is it that you do? And for me to understand it in a matter of less than a minute. Well, Duncan Taylor is the president of TaylorMade, not the golf company, but the horse company. He's the Merrill Lynch and the Marriott of the horse race industry. Think about what that means. So either the horse was grown there and traded there, or the horse lives there. So he's either with the Merrill Lynch trading them or growing them, or with the Marriott, he's hosting these horses, many of which are winners of Kentucky Derby and all kinds of prestigious races. But what he's really known to me is as a leader in bringing Catholic social doctrine to his business and really, deeply thinking about this in what he does. He does this in a family business where he is the husband of Carol and the father of 5. Duncan?
Thank you. I'm in awe to be here. He didn't tell you about my degrees. I went to a college. I got every degree there. It was the School of Hard Knocks. And God lives in each one of you, and Christ is in each one of you. And when Christ saw well, I forget, it was in the scriptures, but he was saying that, you fed me, you clothed me, and they said, well, when did we do that? And he said, well, when I was sick and in the poor. But I also think our doctrine has been weak, and I've always had a complaint with Jesus, but I don't know what he thinks about it because he hadn't really answered me, but that I've never been into a Catholic church where they said, let's pray for all these real greedy rich dudes. They need lots of prayers, and we need to bring them to Christ. And that's the truth. All of us need Christ. So each one of us are a gift. We have Christ inside of us. The more we let Christ grow in us, the better gift we are. We can't outgive Christ. Give yourself away. And if it's in your business, I'm blessed, and I didn't know this when I first started because I was I was greedy, and I was bought into the success that everybody's heard about and the material. I wanted to make $1 million, but I was such an age, and then after that I wanted to hit 10, and then I just wanted to make money. But as time went on, I saw that wasn't the most important thing. So I'm in the horse business. I've got billionaires that I keep horses for, and I've got people that work for me that just swam across the Rio Grande and hiked their way to Kentucky and got a Social Security card, and they passed all the stuff, and they come in there and they go to work. So that's the kind of diversity God's blessed me with, and it's up to me to make myself the best gift that I can. So I'm in Regnum Christi, and we were studying the encyclical Labrum Exergens, and as we were studying that, Pope John Paul used a lot of big words, so the Holy Spirit knew, well, Duncan won't understand this, so I got a thing in the mail from his way at work. And I said, well, that's funny, that's a coincidence. We're talking about this labor and work, and people aren't objects, and they're not just for task, and maybe I'll go down to South Carolina and look at this. So I drove down to South Carolina, and I met Armando, and basically he's out there. It's like the McDonald's franchise for bringing Christ into your business. So Christ sent me that, and it wasn't long after that, we're slow readers in Kentucky, so we were still reading the encyclical, me and a few other guys, and then I got an email, and it was from Andreas about the Pope and the CEO. I said, well, God sent me another message, so I read that book. So, this is about it. Our economy had gone down. I was basically about half depressed. I was thinking, we're selling less horses, they're bringing less money, and all the billionaires want to pay me less commission. Things aren't looking too good in my business. So I was struggling, and Christ was asking me to do a few things. There was one issue in my business that kept bothering me, that it wasn't very upright, and we'd had this check that we'd sent out to somebody, and it was for like $350,000. And at the time, my accountants changed and all this stuff, so it had been about a year, and I hadn't even thought about it, and they brought it back up. We got to do something about this check. And I was thinking, I was going to Eucharistic adoration, and God kept pecking me on the shoulder, said, hey, look into this check. So I told one of the guys that works for me, I said, go call who's supposed to got the check, because it was some company and they went out of business. And he calls up the person that was supposed to receive the check, and this guy says, I dealt with those guys. I don't want to hear a thing about the horse business. Don't ever call me back. I don't want to hear it. So I said, well, that's great, God. Thank you. I'm glad he didn't want to know about it, but I still went to adoration. He still kept pecking me on the shoulder and said, hey, you better check this out a little further. So we wrote a letter to the people and said, hey, we know you didn't want to hear about it. Well, the guy calls back and says, my dad, at about that time, got Alzheimer's, and he put the check someplace, and we didn't have it. And, we sent the money to him. So that was like, if anything I'm talking about, if Jesus asks anything of you, do it immediately. It makes your life a lot better. It helps your, it's the prosperity gospel. You can't outgive Jesus. Everything since I adopted his way at work into my business has been better. My dad told me you can't ever outgive God. He gave me another piece of advice, Frank, that you would like. He said, Duncan, when you get married, he said, pick somebody you wouldn't mind being your mother. So So that worked out good for me. You probably never met anybody that's won a lottery. I've won 2 lotteries, and I never bought a ticket. The day I was born, the parents I was born to, and the day I married my wife. Thank you, and God bless you.
Duncan, you're a beautiful inspiration. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for being here. Before we go to questions, and so you can start to line up here, don't all grab the phone at once, the microphone at once, okay? So we can start to ask some questions. But let me just point something out. There's not many here right now, but with the students who are here, everybody who's a student here, please stand up quickly. Several of our students are here. Usually this is full. Let's not forget that we are here for these young people. This is why we're doing this whole thing. They're here to come and see us witness and talk about this. It's very inspiring to be at CUA and with our student community, many of which have sent me emails asking me to lobby for them with their professors to get a class off to come here and listen to you. We have a special group of students, I think, at the business school at CUA, and I ask you to do a couple of favors for them. First, please pray for them. The first course they all take here is called the Vocation of Business. We try to first answer the question of what is your vocation? What does God want to see for you in life? And then if they start to do that and they start to move into business, they need some help in developing and flourishing. If you have a company that accepts internships for the summer or during the year, then I would certainly love to hear from you. I still have several of my students who are looking for something meaningful to do this summer. And then we have a whole graduating class coming out of really excellent students who have gone through this whole virtue training, and I can certainly recommend them to you. So whether you're watching this now or you're here, please let me know if you're interested in any of our students, and I'd be so happy to introduce you to them. Now, do we have any questions for our panel? Please.
I have a question I'll direct to Michael, but invite the entire panel to jump in. When you're talking about the 3 things that are necessary for free markets to flourish, property, access to the courts, and I forgot the third one now. Exchange, yeah, thank you, free exchange. That primarily applies to third world countries. But think about a state like Michigan. You've got a city where Acton Institute is located, Grand Rapids, which has a flourishing economy and generous philanthropists and things like that. And on the other side of the state, you have cities like Detroit and Flint, with unemployment that's more than twice the national average, average incomes that are way below the poverty line. They're suffering terribly. And they have private property rights, they have access to the courts, and they have free exchange, but yet something's going wrong. So how do we fix the cities that are struggling here in the United States?
Thank you for that question. I'm originally from California, so I don't know. No. I think we're doing fine out there. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So I think that's the question is very good. I think it's important on a number of levels. One is, I think that distinction between the developing world, where the institutions of justice aren't rich, don't exist for many people, and then in the developed world where poverty really has different causes. Now, there are similarities. Most of my research has been on poverty in the developing world, so I don't want to get the disease of a panel called expertitis. But I think one thing that's really important, I heard a lecture on it and get you the data from the source, but if you're, this goes back to the family point that Mary and Michael and Frank have all talked about, that if you're from an intact white family, the chance of being in poverty is 8%. If you're from a broken white family, it's like 35 or something like this. If you're from a broken African American family, the chance of being in poverty is 49%. And if you're from an intact African American family, the chance of being in poverty is 8%. So it's about the same as Caucasians. And this shows the fundamental point of family. So I would say, part of the there's a lot of kind of policies to solve problems, but a lot of the family policy has been a disaster for poor people. And so poor people are really getting the brunt of what Mary talked about in the sexual revolution, about a host of other things that really have decimated families and are the main cause of poverty. Now, there's obviously crony capitalism, right? Entrenched special interest groups, especially in cities like Detroit, where you have a lot of problems. But I think the biggest question for poverty really is family policy, and that's all I'd say there. As far as more detailed things on Detroit, that's above my pay grade.
Duncan?
I think it all starts in the family, and it starts with one-on-one, the parent being Christ to the child, and it's a fundamental relationship where the parent actually takes responsibility. I think Frank hit on it. You know, we don't prepare people for marriage, and that's one of the most important relationships, and we don't prepare the person for being a parent. And it takes, like he was saying, it's not giving them the pole and saying, go fish. I run an inner city boys club. You got to get down there before you really realize, and you got to be with them one-on-one, and you got to know their pain, and you got to see what they're going through. And it takes people that have been given like us. It's not dollars that they need us. They need our time, they need our energy, and they need our love. And it's agape type love. It's not eros.
Matt?
Yeah, if I can just comment briefly on it. I think the problem in cities like Detroit is political. Yeah, just to name the elephant in the room, or actually the donkey. Well, no, I shouldn't go. You can go down the road. But I'm reminded of something that Thomas Sowell wrote. I think it was in the Housing Boom and Bust. He talked about poverty, and he talked about how poverty it's a stage in life that many or most of us pass through, regardless of the demographic of coming from intact families. Poverty is something that young couples pass through when they're just getting started in their careers, when they're just getting started with their families. You're having children, you're not quite where you want to be in your career. Many of us go through very, very hard times, and maybe we are in a poverty situation. But typically, our children grow, they leave the house, our expenses fall, our careers get better, and eventually it's a stage that we pass through. And as we're older, we're no longer poor, we're no longer in the poverty zone, but somebody else is. Our children are, especially if we can't help them, which again is a very practical, material way that families can help each other. But the peculiarity of our era is that we have turned what is a phase, and it's always been a phase, into a class. The poor are now a class, and it's an institutionalized class, and it's a permanent underclass. And now we have very serious problems, severe problems in our major cities. I live in Washington, D.C., right? I live in this area. This is a city with problems. I came from Ann Arbor. Detroit is a city with problems. And a lot of this just has to do with, I think, the critique in Centesimus Annus of the welfare state. It's the idea of a state that loses a sense of its limits. It doesn't understand that its administration of the common good passes through the activity of personal activity, of individual human beings. They're not there to solve every problem in the world. They're there to create conditions in which we can solve every problem in the world. And where people make that mistake, you get serious poverty. The city, Detroit being one of those cities. Yeah.
Just real quick on Detroit, because I talked to these 10 pastors, inner city pastors, African Americans, and they told me two things. One is that most 13, 14-year-old boys that they know have never been hugged by their father. So this goes to your point earlier. And another point is if this is quite provocative, I think probably true. If you look at family policy from the 1960s on, especially towards African American families, and you look at the way slaveholders tried to break apart families, you see a very interesting coincidence and congruence, because many things, the way that family policy has been applied has really harmed the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, my comment is in line with a lot of what was said, but I want to maybe put the emphasis on maybe the need. There's an American need of of a stronger partnership between the state and the local grassroots organization. There's a lot of, I came to the States 14 years ago from Europe, and I'm amazed by the amount of volunteerism that we have, here in America. A lot of people volunteer, want to do good, want to help in the community, want to have a relationship. And why are we not, in our government institution, harnessing that? These communities have a relationship. They know what's going on there. They know what the needs are. They want to build a fabric of strong communities and help one another. And yet we have this big divide, it's not just in the States, but it's strong in the States, between what the state should do and what the local organization should do. And I think there's a big area of improvement of this partnership that could really unleash a lot of good.
I think, to you a second, is Jonathan Reyes here? Yeah. So there's a man who could tell you a lot about poverty if somebody is interested in that topic of inner-city poverty. I think Jonathan, who works at the USCCB and was on the panel yesterday, could speak volumes, couldn't you? Next question.
Yes, you actually answered most of my initial question through your conversations and your discussion. However, I wanted to put you as someone from a broken white family who's had to, in the last 3 years or so, really struggle with poverty, and 2 years, 3 months of marriage, and second kid on the way. One of the big things for me is I never feel like I'm doing enough. As a Catholic professional who's still struggling with poverty, I do feel that I owe the poor and owe my community a certain amount of service. And I know that you spoke actually to the feeding the poor every day by feeding your child, which was wonderful. But is there any way that you can imagine or give me advice, or give, in the spirit of the students that are here, give young people advice on how to help the poor, how to help their community, with what little time we might have? And that's really my question.
Yes. Well, not long ago, we all were probably in similar situations, so no longer, maybe some longer than others, and myself included, is what gave me peace is that, well, first of all, realization that the people you can help and your first neighbors is your wife and your children. So let's not forget about that as well, you know. You would do a disservice to building a strong family if you would neglect them. But second is not just about, as we said before, about material, poverty. It's about building a relationship with your neighbor that you meet in the elevator every day or on the stairs. It's about having a better relationship with your coworkers. And it's about, if you're in a business, treating your customers and really be good to them and not just trying to complete a transaction. It's about spending some time coaching a coworker who needs help in crafting an email, that report for the boss. There's a lot of needs out there every day that you may not realize, but if you think a little bit hard about various forms of needs, may become apparent. And so it's not about necessarily just about time and just about money.
Yeah, in the spirit of what Frank Hanna said, forgive me, and thank you for your personal story. I just have to tell you, love your wife, that's first. Love your children, that's second. Perform the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which you can do at home. Make sure your children see you making a gift of self to them and inoculate them against the virus that will lead to poverty, against the vices. And then do apostolate. Stay close to the Lord and bring as many people to Him as you can. Because the spiritual poverty is the poverty that underlies all of the rest of these forms of poverty. That is what we're suffering the most from. That's what Mother Teresa told us. She came to New York and she said, it's amazing, in this land of abundance, you are suffering from so much poverty. Do apostolate. Bring people to Christ. I think that's the best you can do. And then if you want to do more, amen, do more. And I encourage you, but do that. Do that, and that's a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm. And network the heck out of this room. Yeah? So, thank you very much. Madam.
I'm Arlene Edmonds. I'm a correspondent with the Philadelphia Tribune, which is the oldest continuously published African-American newspaper in the country. And I also write for CatholicPhilly.com and some other publications. My question was, you're talking a lot about poverty, but I think one of the things that a lot of people miss and they're not addressing is the sin of racism. Because a lot of times that comes into play, and I know even me personally, I have 2 graduate degrees, and whenever I'm going for other job interviews, racism does come up. I went to one I was just sharing with some people within the past month, and when I was going to meet with the board, I could hear them talking about me. They did not know that I was African American, and they were saying, "She's black? She went to St. Joseph's University," and they were looking on the different things, and they were saying things. So this is a reality that's there. And when we talk about crony capitalism, some people are excluded. I know many bright people who are looking for jobs, who are looking to gain capital to start businesses, and the sin of racism comes up into play. So how do you address that?
I'll take that first. I think that one thing that this might not be kind or nice, but obviously you've raised yourself up, and you have a good job. And I think if you look at it's spiritual poverty, but there's also material poverty, and the black people have been put down, and the mindset that people are against them, and they are a lot. But I'm going to make myself the best human being I can be, work as hard as I can on that, because you will never control what other people think. And when you look like a saint like Maximilian Kolbe in World War II that was in the concentration camp, and they were beating him and doing everything to him because he was a Catholic priest, and he had every kind of harm and torture to him, because he had the pearl of all pearls, the faith in Jesus Christ. And I'm not saying I have that, because I probably have a 1/1,000,000th of the faith of that man, but he was able to overcome it and have a happy life even in those conditions. So, I don't have a solution that I can tell you for the big problem, but as an individual person, I look at those boys in the boys club in the inner city that are black, and I tell them, you're going to be great one day. You can do it. You're in control. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. You're going to do it, and you're going to be great. And that's the message I try to give.
Michael?
Thank you for your question and for your story. I think this is a deep, serious problem here in the United States, obviously for historical reasons, and I think across the world historically. I think so let me try to say the best I can. I think one of the problems goes back to the thing I brought up in the beginning of objects and subjects, is that we tend to treat people who are different from us as objects. And so, and you see, but I also think, I'll go back to that in a second, but I think, we do see that there is some evidence of racism. I think if you look at, say, for example, let's talk about African Americans. I think the African Americans are about 12% of the population and about 80 to 90% of the abortions. This was done by the eugenics movement and by a host of others who want to eradicate African American families, who forcefully sterilized African American women. And this is absolutely racist and inexcusable. I think you see another thing, again, whether it's racist or it's just the effects of bad policy, those who survive abortion are sent to failing schools dominated by entrenched political classes, and then we imprison African American men at a rate that is, I think, unacceptable. And so again, you don't have fathers. So I don't have very politically correct views on this, but I think there's institutional and structural racism. And I already mentioned, if you look at the way the black family has been treated by kind of, social engineer policymakers who have essentially created the state as the substitute for the man. When you remove the man, you break down the family, you create poverty, you create a host of other things. And so, and this is, again, you saw the same thing take place during slaveholding periods, where you want to weaken the man and make the women attached to the master, or in this case, the state. So I think that, but, and I think finally the last thing I'll say is, this goes back to the fundamental question about subjects, and this is what John Paul has to tell us across the board, that fundamentally, Cardinal Scola in his book, The Nuptial Mystery, says in Adam and Eve when they fell that identity and difference is what they originally saw, but the difference became in front of the identity, and Adam turned Eve into an object. I think this is the fall of man was not just then, as Leon Cass says in his book beautifully. It's always the case. And so what happens in racism is fundamentally the fall of seeing the difference instead of the identity. And so it's not simply a political problem, it is a deep-seated moral and spiritual problem that I think fundamentally only Christ can heal.
We're almost out of time, but let me say it is very difficult, I think, for somebody who hasn't been, there's 5 of us up here who have not been victims of racism, to speak about racism or the effects of it, because we obviously have not been a victim of that, and you have. So I think that's something to point out. But poverty certainly has something to do worldwide with the us and them, and race is one aspect of the them. This could be a panel on its own, but time is, I think this is the last call for beer, and so I'm going. So we are almost done. Father Spitzer is going to close us up, or do we? No, meaning for this session here. We're almost done with this session, but if you could maybe close up with
Spitzer going to summarize?
With the summary? Because you have a much better memory than me, Father.
Well, it was a very, very full session. I think the key insights that I got, the 2 big key insights, are that poverty is not just a lacking of material items, but it is, first and foremost, it's an interior lack. It's an interior absence that is, and it could be an absence of spirit, it could be an absence of education. As we heard this morning, it could be an absence of an absence of moral culture and moral training. It could be an absence of family. It could be an absence of many different things. And I think as people who are trying to take a whole human ecological view of poverty, the kinds of solutions that we've been talking about today in the panel, and very good solutions, can trace back to any of these things. But I think the second takeaway that I got, without getting into all of the specifics of people's treatment of specific questions like racism and other questions, is that we do have to take a comprehensive approach. And I know in some ways that sounds like, gosh, you're just complicating the issue before you really get at it. We're people of action. Let us do something. But of course, if we do that, we could turn into ready, fire, aim, and of course that wouldn't do much good at all. Or taking Michael Novak's advice as well, we would get ourselves into a completely substandard treatment of real poverty that everybody has been mentioning today. So I think the key thought that I would have for the takeaway is that we build a very comprehensive view of what poverty is, and then take the insights not only from our panelists here today, which were very good, but also take the insights from our previous speakers about how we as business can build the family, build the moral culture and virtue, and of course build the spiritual and religious culture, and then use enterprise, use these practical steps, use all the various kinds of experience from so many different people to rectify it. So I think that's the kind of Catholic solution that the popes have been encouraging us to. And my last just comment is this. When you have resources like this that are here at this conference, my one thought is, boy, we got to get an email exchange or something going on. I don't know what the follow-up is going to be, but boy, I would love it if we could start some kind of a network where people make their emails available so that we can maybe speak to each other following up on the conference and use the synergies that are so clearly here present to really help us. So thank you very, very much to all of our panelists, and trying to do a wrap-up of all of your good insights would have been a major impossibility, but thank you for so much for your contribution also to the alleviation of poverty. You guys are great examples, and at the end of the day, we need heroic examples. Thank you. Yeah, we have a 10-minute break here, and then we come back for two more speakers.
Thank you, Father.
Oh, no, thank
bless.
you. God bless you.
Appreciate it.
Your humility is great. I want some of your humility. Oh, and all your experience. I know, wow. What you have accomplished. Yeah. Torres is great. Yeah, that's right.
I'd be drunk in some back alley doing something stupid.
Well, me too. Believe me, I had my first call. Good. Hey, Joe? You want to just quick, we got 10 minutes.
Just go to... Ok. ¿Lo van a ocupar este? Ok. Entonces... Okay. So, he's gonna help. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be sitting right over here until 5.
Okay, yeah. So, but this is what I want. I would like to. I would like for you to help me with the following. I like to keep this. I am a Mac person, so I'm having a difficulty here. I want to be able to show this.
Oh, that's just for the projector volume.
La familia es uno de los bienes más preciosos de la humanidad.
La copertura trovate dentro l'auricolare o il microfono. Il canale 1 italiano, canale 2 francese, canale 3 spagnolo, canale 4 inglese, canale 5, ma no, non c'è, tedesco non c'è un canale per il tedesco, si può parlare ma non si può ricevere. I giornalisti potranno, nel tempo che avremo a disposizione, porre alcune domande ai nostri oratori. Quando io darò la parola a qualcuno dei giornalisti nel tempo che avremo, si trova nel bracciolo, come abbiamo detto. Sono le 11. Mi pare che la distribuzione dei testi
Welcome back, everyone. If we could reconvene, take our seats. You're going to receive the award for troopers for the longest consecutive number of sessions ever sponsored in a single conference. So get ready to receive your awards later. But if you could take your seats now, and we have Cardinal Turkson who is ready to come to the stage. If you could take your seats and close the doors, please. Could somebody close the doors? Yeah. Would folks close it? Thank you. Thanks, everyone. If you could turn off your cell phones, too, it would be so very much appreciated. All right. It's a true honor today to have Cardinal Peter Turkson speak to us. As you know, the whole conference has been devoted to our social encyclicals, and Cardinal Peter Turkson is the head, the president of the Pontifical Commission on Justice and Peace. And this is an incredibly important commission. It certainly is the sponsor commission for so many first-line charitable organizations, first responder organizations, Catholic charities, and just innumerable other good works of the Catholic Church. And in addition to that, also the theoretical works that the Church publishes in the area of justice and peace, which includes the Catholic social teaching. Today, Dr. Schramm did mention the Compendium on Catholic Social Teaching. This work is a very, very important and good work. I know there can be obvious disagreements with some of the things in it, but for all intents and purposes, the index alone is worth the price of admission. The way in which all the various documents that we've been discussing here have been put under each of these various themes is important. The way to read, the hermeneutic for reading the social documents is included. It's just a real gem, and it's got some terrific things in it. And, of course, Cardinal Turkson's commission has published it. I also want to say about Cardinal Turkson, he grew up in Ghana. He was ordained a priest in 1975 for the Diocese of Cape Coast in Ghana. And then he went off for his biblical studies. And he went to the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. And for those of you who have not been there, this is a really hard curriculum. You wind up learning a lot of arcane Semitic languages in addition to really rigorous biblical exegetical method. And he took a licentiate there and started his dissertation, but instead returned to Ghana. He then, of course, was consecrated a bishop in 2003, and then was elevated to Cardinal in 2009. 2013, he was confirmed as the President of the Pontifical Biblical Commission on Justice and Peace. A remarkably wonderful man. Speaks only 6 languages fluently. I know some other Semitic languages as well. And of course is a real conduit and organizer for so many of the charitable causes and so much of the Catholic social teaching we've been talking about. What an honor today to have the very head of that Pontifical Commission with us, Cardinal Peter Turkson. Cardinal?
Thank you. So thank you for the Schwitzler. Okay. So Schwitzler. Duncan. So I may be able to speak all of those languages, but it's always with an accent. And that's just what this is going to be. You're going to be listening to a lot of accent. I spent time, as a father just said, in Albany, New York, for 4 years doing theology. But those 4 years of stay in Albany didn't quite vaccinate me against, accents and developing accents later in life. And so there's quite a little bit of that still left in me. So, Your Excellencies, Reverend Fathers, brothers, and all of you, my dear friends, you've asked me and invited me kindly to answer the question, is business to care for our common home? I want to thank you for so inviting our council to be part of this celebration this afternoon, these past 3 days. And so for the occasion to be part of the second time here with this, business school, and for everything that you do here. My answer to this question is of course going to be yes, and an unqualified yes, and if you want, yes with emphasis. At the beginning of this year, in January, I was in Chile at the invitation of the business, CEO of business groups in Chile, who wanted to consider the role of business not in society but for society. And the discussion then was the role of business, what business can do for society. And there it was also very easy to say and to describe the role of business for society. This afternoon, the question is, what can business do for the care of our common home? And so I wish to approach this, if you want, with 5 short and concise, statements or presentations. I will begin by introducing the encyclical Laudato Si, and then ask about humanity's vocation to care for the common home, and then look briefly at about how the 3 popes, so Leo XIII, John Paul II, and now Pope Francis, how they prepare to answer the question that you put to us, and then go on to see how Laudato Si also allows us then to answer this question, and finally, we'll go on then to conclude responding specifically to the question, is business to care for our common home? So let's begin. Laudato Si. The story about Laudato Si is interesting and can be long, but we'll skip all of that. With how it began and how it began, very casually, I'd gone to the Pope on a regular session to just talk about the work in our office. And after the conversation, he says, I'm thinking about writing an encyclical on natural and human ecology. What do you think about it? So, Holy Father, it's a great idea. Think about it. And so I leave, and on a Palm Sunday celebration, so this was in February. Palm Sunday, after Mass in St. Peter's Square, as he's used to do, he takes off his chasuble and greets all the cardinals. So he comes to me and then, as some people in our office had suggested, we need to have a meeting with the Pope for the Pope to point out the salient features of the encyclical. So I asked Holy Father, when can we get together to discuss, the encyclical? So no, you just begin to write. And so everybody after that was, what was the Pope asking you to write? And so that was the encyclical. Pope Francis apparently didn't want us to start a draft on the encyclical with his ideas. He wanted us to start the encyclical with our own ideas, leaving us free to kind of dream the way we wanted to dream and imagine what we wanted to imagine. So, he can also then edit it. So that's actually what happened. So we handed in the draft at the beginning of July 2014, thinking that he was going to use his vacation to correct them, and by the end of summer 2014, we'd have an encyclical. Didn't happen that way. It took him a whole year to do that, and so 2015, June, we had encyclical. So Pope Francis is the one who speaks to us, and I'll let him speak to you first about the encyclical, then I'll continue, if it's possible. It's a 90 seconds, short, so very, very brief about it.
La familia es uno de los bienes más preciosos de la humanidad. ¿Pero acaso no es el más vulnerable? Cuando la familia no es protegida y empiezan las dificultades, tipo económico, de tipo de salud, de cualquier tipo, los chicos crecen en cierta atmósfera de tristeza. Quiero compartir con vos, con Jesús, mi intención del mes, para que las familias en dificultad reciban los apoyos necesarios y los niños puedan crecer en ambientes sanos y serenos.
We had a slightly divergent version, but you still saw the Pope, so. So here then are some of the key takeaways from the video on Laudato Si. The Holy Father affirms that our nature is created by God, surrendered by the gifts of creation. Our failures are that we overconsume and that we do not share the gifts of creation. We have tilled too much and we have kept too little, with dire consequences then for the poor and for the planet. And the last bit is that it is now urgent that we change our sense of progress, our management of the economy, and our style of life. Now more than ever, the world needs leadership in all its fields of endeavor, and the various fields need to work together in pursuit of the common good of humanity. Everyone must play a role, and Pope Francis speaks to everyone. He exalts those in high stations in politics, in business, and in science, and encourages those who live and work in very humble circumstances, all of us to come together and to commit to the needs of changing the world and making the world a better place. So following the Pope's example, I wish to implore you to approach others whom you consider utterly different and therefore distant from yourselves. They are nevertheless your brothers and sisters, and with them we need to fashion this world into a home. And so, if I may, let me repeat, we are brothers and sisters, poor and rich, well-fed and hungry, in one common home. The Holy Father does not discriminate. He gives appropriate praise to the champions of technology and to the champions of commerce when their leadership achieves great good for the world. At the same time, he has also vigorously proclaimed the necessity for leadership and participation by those on the periphery, and not only in the centers of power. And so, the last time when he visited Latin America in July, he was in Bolivia. And in Bolivia, he met a whole group of people together that are called or referred to as a popular movement. And this is what he said to them. You, the lowly, the exploited, and the poor, you, the underprivileged, can do and are doing a lot already. I would even say that the future of humanity is in a great measure in your hands through your ability to organize and carry out creative initiatives and alternatives, through your daily efforts to ensure that the 3 T's, trabajo, techo, and tierra, so work, housing, and land, These then constitute the areas in which you can make a difference. And so your participation in the great processes of change on the national and regional and global levels must be felt in these areas. So when Pope Francis then speaks to the business community, he encourages a broad sense of vocation which gives rise to a deepened exercise of responsibility. In his words to the World Economic Forum in 2014, at a message that I had the honor of reading and presenting to the forum, the Holy Father said, as you have heard several times in these past days here, business, in fact, is a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves challenged by a greater meaning of life. These are scarcely the words then of somebody who does not understand or who does not appreciate the role of business in society. At the same time, he asks the world economic leaders to recognize that the success which have been achieved, even if they have reduced poverty for a great number of people, often have led to widespread social exclusion. Indeed, the majority of men and women of our time still continue to experience daily insecurity, often with dramatic consequences. As you know, at the beginning of this year, Daboub, as last year, Oxfam came up with figures about inequalities, talking about 1% of the world owning over whatever millions, and then the 90% still, living on, as it were, trickles. Pope Francis, however, is giving the world his wonderful encyclical Laudato Si on the care of home, and it adds another warning to this earlier statement. Not only is there poverty and social exclusion in the world, in the midst of plenty, but economic activity is also degrading the natural environment, even to the point of threatening the nature of human life. And so with this, the Pope addresses then the message and invitation to care for our common home. And with addressing this invitation of the Holy Father, it may be necessary, as several of you are very big experts of the Church's social teaching, to notice a small shift also in Laudato Si. In the earlier encyclicals of the popes, they talk about stewardship of creation. Care doesn't come up much. The expression that in the past has been used to describe our relationship with the world is in terms of stewardship. Pope Francis moves away slightly from that. In fact, in Laudato Si, he talks about stewardship of creation only twice. The rest of his presentation about the relationship between us and creation is in terms of care. Care becomes a privileged expression that the Holy Father uses to describe our relationship with creation. Care for creation, as if he wanted to underline the thing of passion and commitment with which we need to deal with creation and everything around it. So, humanity's vocation then, according to Pope Francis in this encyclical, is to care for our common home. The encyclical Laudato Si, then released last June on the 20th, 2015, teaches that the way we interact with natural world is deeply related to how we interact with our fellow human beings. And so, in fact, there's no valid way to separate these two aspects. Therefore, all decisions about the natural environment are ethical decisions, and this implicates business too. This is inescapable, and it has important implications. So, in the encyclical, you read very often that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor both are rising to God. It means that technology and commerce must be held to transcendental standards of meaning, and that their outlook must also be moral. They must be defined by solidarity, but with all people alive today and with those not yet born. and be oriented towards the common good. It is not enough then to be a business innovator and a producer of goods. These are worthwhile, certainly, only if they serve integrated ecological citizenship. And in this era then of great environmental crisis, actually of linked crisis in nature and society, Pope Francis asks us to hear not only the cry of creation or nature, but also the cry of the poor. Not only are we grievously damaging our common home, but in doing so, we also wounding the poor and the excluded of the world. And so the part of the encyclical in this regard may be detailed out as follows. All human beings are affected, and everything in nature too, by climate change, misuse of natural resources, waste, and pollution. Everything is interconnected, and we cannot understand the social or the natural world or any part of it in isolation. Everyone must act responsibly to save our world from the individuals, from individuals recycling, to enterprises reducing their ecological footprint, and to world leaders settling and enforcing ambitious carbon reduction targets and policies. And we must be truthful, not hide or distort the facts in order to make a personal or company gain. And we must engage in dialogue, genuine, trusting, and trustworthy dialogue with all sectors of society with view to finding a solution to what we face. Beyond the industrial age's short-sighted, if you want, confidence in technology and commerce, we must transcend ourselves in prayer, simplicity, and solidarity. On an account of this, we can make one more step and see how the three popes, especially celebrating the 125th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, from Pius to Francis, how they help us respond to our responsibility towards creation and the poor. It's a very happy experience to be here to celebrate 125th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, which launched the formal magisterium of the Catholic social teaching. Pope Leo XIII responded to the res novae, the new things of his time, which were then the Industrial Revolution, which were the major social and economic upheavals wrought by the Industrial Revolution. And in this great encyclical, Pope Leo applied timeless moral principles to particular circumstances of his time. And that's what all social, if you want, teachings of the church intend to do, to apply the sources of revelation to the concrete situations of our time, with view to providing guidance, leadership, and companionship, if you want, to everything that's happening. Leo XIII then vigorously condemned socialism, but he also condemned the unjust practices in capitalism, the greed of unchecked competition that allowed a small number of very rich men to lay upon the teeming masses of the laboring poor a yoke little better than that of slavery itself. He called for economic relationship based on justice and on charity, and recognizing the centrality of the living wage and the calling for the rights of workers to organize and to bargain collectively. This aspect of human ecology remains of central importance today, not just in some of the world's poorest countries where workers face conditions every bit as harsh and degrading as Pope Leo's times, but also in countries like the United States. In the question and answer session, we heard about cases in Detroit and places around there. So, fast forward in all of this a little bit, 100 years later, St. John Paul II, in Centesimus Annus, provided a moral response to the new things of his time. And in this case, after the fall of the wall in Berlin and the collapse of communism, John Paul II was, of course, happy to see that degrading and inhuman systems confined to the trash can of history. But he was not triumphalistic either. With great foresight, he recommended and recognized that the dangers of capitalism, especially when not circumscribed with a strong juridical and moral framework, when it sees profit as the exclusive goal of business, and when it falls under the sway of an ideology of the market, or when it elevates the cult of consumerism. I should note then that some have claimed that Centesimus Annus changed the tenor of Kali social teaching and even abrogated prior teaching of market economy. Not quite. Nothing could be further from the truth. St. John Paul II followed directly in the footsteps of his predecessors, and like his predecessors, he recognized the twin dangers of collectivism and individualism when both of them do not respect the dignity of the human person. But prefiguring Laudato Si, St. John Paul II establishes the moral conditions for an authentic human ecology. He denounced our failures to find our true peace in the world and the hubris of declaring independence from reality and behaving with absolute dominion. And so instead of carrying out his role as a co-operator with God in the work of creation, the human person sometimes does set himself up in place of God and thus ends up provoking a rebellion not only between him and God, but also between himself and nature. Laudato Si then follows on this great tradition. As Pope Francis himself has said, it is not a green encyclical that he wrote a social encyclical. And just like Rerum Novarum and Centesimus Annus before it, it addresses the new things of his day. And these days, the new things then are the environmental question, and then, if you want, the question still of poverty and exclusion in our midst. It is these then that Pope Francis addresses his encyclical to, and so crowds for us, appealing to and using the song of St. Francis to listen to the cry of both the earth and the cry of the poor. Rerum Novarum stated the principle as follows: whoever has received from the divine bounty a large measure of temporal blessing, whether they be external and material or gifts of the mind, has received them for the purpose of using them for the perfecting of his own nature, and at the same time that he may employ them also as the steward of God's providence for the benefit of others. St. John Paul II then forcefully reaffirmed this teaching, stating that God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members, without excluding or favoring anyone. This type of teaching again prepares for the formulation in the Church's social teaching of the principle of the universal destination of the goods of the earth, which invites us to recognize that everything that God is endowed and bestowed on us is for the well-being of all. And so briefly we can, quickly by way of conclusion, look at Laudato Si then and the role of business. So turning to Pope Francis and his challenge to business, as I mentioned, Pope Francis is not anti-business. Quite the opposite, he sees it as a noble profession. But to live up to this vocational calling, it must orient its activities towards the common good. For sure, profit has its legitimate role to play in any business, but it cannot be the only role or even the primary role. Rather, businesses must always strive to meet genuine human needs rather than feed a culture of consumerism, a whirlwind, if you want, of needless buying and selling due to the slavery of true consumerism. And it should always put jobs before short-term profits. This is a key concern for Pope Francis, so much so that there is an entire section of this encyclical, paragraphs 124 to 129, in which the Holy Father treats the issue of employment and jobs. One of the ways business can help take care of the earth, our common home, is to provide employment, is to provide jobs and decent jobs for those who live on it. This invariably will throw us against another challenge, and it is the increasing, if you want, automation of industries and systems of production, as if it's a replacement of one object by another. And if the system of automation and replacement with robotics and all of that continues, gives the impression that human beings as workers are sometimes understood as mere objects that can be replaced by a machine or something. And this becomes a challenge again to industry to valorize it, to find value in the role of human beings as workers. And in doing this, we ended then presenting before business the three things which probably ultimately describe our responsible relationship with the earth. It is essential to produce good work and services which are truly good and which really meet the needs of humanity. Then it is to produce work which really is dignifying. Dignifying in the sense that work recognizes the dignity of the human person. And finally, it is to make wealth which is truly good. And wealth which is truly good is wealth that does not only accrue to a profit of industry and the owners, but as Henry Ford is supposed to have said years ago over here, there's no point in having an automobile culture when people earn salaries of bicycles. Having an automobile culture with people earning salaries of bicycles does not allow them to provide a market, the necessary market for this car industry. So the wealth then must also be a wealth which is commensurate with the dignity of the workers and human person. So by way then of concluding, the question again is business, to care for our common home. So, kind of argue that the answer to this question is a robust yes. But business caring for our common home cannot be business as usual. Some 200 years of business as usual, according to the technocrat paradigm, has brought our common home to the brink of both environmental and social collapse. Indeed, during his visit to Africa, in Nairobi, when the Pope had a chance to address the United Nations group there, he said that if man does not change his course, we are bound on ecological suicide. And so made an urgent appeal then for a change of lifestyle. Going forward, business will need to adopt and implement a new idea of progress and of development. There is the need to redefine progress. There is a need then to redefine what human progress is, especially if it is determined by development and industrialization, technology, and all of those. Caring for our common home requires, as Pope Francis says, not just an economic and technological revolution, but also a cultural and a spiritual revolution. A profoundly different way of approaching the relationship between people and the environment, a new way of ordering the global economy. And this, in turn, places a great responsibility on the shoulders of business leaders, as well as popular leaders. But I'm confident that you, in the 3 days of gathering, exchange, and listen to good practice and examples and all of that, are up to this standard. The way the Holy Father concludes his introduction in Laudato Si is to stress the urgency of the situation, and so to make an urgent appeal, and then express the hope and the confidence in the ability of humanity to be able to rise up to a change. This will be the concluding paragraph 13, 14, and 15 of Laudato Si. The situation is urgent, and so he makes an urgent appeal. But then he also expresses the deep trust he has in the ability of the human family and humanity to change. And so it is the same confidence then that I express over here this afternoon. Confidence that all of us gathered here have within us the ability to rise up to this challenge. Do not enslave your eternal values to temporal goods. Instead, deploy the spiritual principles which have been variously presented over here that you hold dear in your own effort to improve the here and the now. And so in this year of mercy, let compassion and caring guide your creativity and business prowess to make this a better world, and let us all join together to take good care of creation as a gift freely bestowed on us and as a gift to cultivate and to keep. And finally, let us remember, we receive this world as a garden from the hands of God, and we may not pass it on to later generations as a wilderness. That's not what God calls us to do. God calls us to pass on the world we received as a garden to the generations who will come after us also as a garden. And it is for so preserving the world as a garden for future generations that we gathered here to look at alternative ways of doing things. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Eminence. Thank you very much. That was great. Thank you, Eminence. It was truly a terrific presentation and a challenge to all of us who really do want heart and soul to be part of that vision that you just articulated of Pope Francis. I think one of the geniuses of Pope Francis, so well brought out by Cardinal Turkson, was he realizes there's got to be not only a change in the idea that the business leaders bring to the marketplace, but the whole hermeneutic that we bring to the marketplace that's going to enable us to do what needs to be done, not just for the natural world, not just for natural ecology, but for human ecology. I think, Cardinal, you challenged us to three different ways of kind of re-articulating our hermeneutic for coming as business leaders into the marketplace. First, we need a whole new conception of the world, the natural world, as our home. We need a whole new conception of the human being and a whole new conception of the common good, particularly the notion of progress. With respect to the natural world, the whole idea that I think the encyclicals, since Rerum Novarum, but now, of course, manifestly true with Laudato Si, is that we see that we need not only to look at the world as our home, but we need to look at the world as being, we're in co-partnership with the Lord, not just in being good stewards, but in caring for and continuing to try to foster the works of creation that the Lord has given. And so we need that mentality of being on partnership and on journey with the Lord to care for the natural world as we as business leaders come into the marketplace. The second, which I think is the specialty of Pope Francis, is the articulation of the human person, the anthropological viewpoint, the human part of human ecology, and to see, to come into the workplace knowing of the intrinsic dignity, but not just as an abstraction, that we look at the intrinsic dignity of human beings with that vision of Pope Francis, who just sees the unique goodness and lovability of every single solitary human mystery that he encounters. And as he looks and gazes into their eyes, and the smile, of course, results in response to him, therein lies the dignity that he has given them just by his very look, that we as business leaders can also give by our very look, our very concern, the same kind of intensity of concern that Pope Francis brings. I mean, that would be a real change in hermeneutic. And of course, the third area, the area of the common good, to try as business leaders, before we go into the workplace, to meditate on how we want to view the common good, and especially how we want to view progress, and looking at progress, not just in terms, in material terms, but looking at progress in spiritual terms, and of course in moral terms, the moral ecology that we've been speaking about today, the institutional ecology that we've been speaking about today, and the various other virtue ecologies that have been coming out throughout the conference. We want to be looking at the common good and progress in those terms. It's a tall order. It's a huge challenge. But luckily, we're all speaking to the choir. Now, of course, we have the challenge of getting our colleagues in the workplace, in the marketplace, to try and embark on that same course of changing our hermeneutic of the natural world, of human beings, and of the common good and progress. Thank you very, very much, Cardinal Turkson. Tremendous treatment, tremendous challenge. We all need to hear it, especially myself. Thank you. We'll move right into our next and final speaker for today. Our speaker will be Dr. Juan Daboub, who runs the Daboub Partnership. He also runs our VII, which are both advisory groups in the area of energy and climate change. Dr. Daboub was head of the World, he was manager of the World Bank, not a bad qualification, and of course he was also the chair of the Human Economics Forum's Council on Climate Change, so he knows of what he speaks. He has devoted a great deal of his life to trying to bring good enterprise solutions to the areas of climate change, and has participated, in a variety of different advisory groups and councils throughout his life on this topic, which of course is germane to Laudato Si. In the midst of all of these things, he's a true entrepreneur and businessman, and has invested much in Latin America to produce goods like snacks and plastics distribution and real estate. But he combines that all with his tremendous work on energy, on economics, and climate change. We are indeed privileged today to have in our midst Dr. Juan Daboub, who will be speaking to us about that very fact, about Laudato Si and climate change. Dr. Daboub.
Thank you, Father, and good afternoon. When Andreas invited me to this event, I didn't know I was going to speak right after His Majesty, His Excellency, Cardinal Turkson, who I had the pleasure of meeting in Rome last year. I don't have the background that he has, or have gone to the great universities he has been to, or the pleasure to work with the Pope. The only thing we have in common is perhaps the accent. So bear with us, bear with me. I'm going to try to make this the last presentation of the day, not to stop us from going to the next activities or to confessions which are taking place next door. You will hear, certainly some of you that were in event of CIC on Monday rather, you will hear some repetition here, but you will also hear complementarities between what His Eminence just said and what I will try to convey to you from the perspective of an engineer, a business person, but also a person that has dedicated about 1/3 of his life in the public sector, about 1/3 in the private sector, and about 1/3 in academia. So that's the angle that I intend to do, to put forward for you as I try to answer the question, how do we integrate environment, business, and faith? And I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of the event. It is quite a distinguished audience, and an extraordinary roster of speakers. Certainly everybody that I heard today has been wonderful. I also like to congratulate Catholic University for the efforts to live up to its name as the only papal university in North America, striving to be faithful to the teachings of Jesus and his church. There are not many left in the U.S. that can claim to be true Catholic schools where crucifixes and Madonnas are covered when a politician shows up. What kind of political correctness is that? It is of particular recognition that the School of Business and Economics is putting the spotlight on some of these issues which we are discussing here today. Because today's culture requires a reality check. A reality check that shows that material and spiritual success are not in contradiction. On the contrary, they are part of the plan God has for each of us. For we cannot redistribute what has not been created. When you hear all of these politicians talking about redistributing the wealth, we have to think first about creating the wealth that then you can redistribute one way or another. Nor multiply the talents that God has given us if we didn't have aspirations and ambitions. I don't believe there is anything wrong about having aspirations and ambitions. We couldn't save lives and improve livelihoods without creating wealth and being responsible citizens of our countries and of the world. We couldn't resolve many of today's challenges of a fast-evolving world without creativity and innovation. Creativity and innovation which flourishes through freedom, economic and political freedom, but also religious freedom. So what Catholic University is doing is really important. It's helping, especially for the students and for others that are listening to all of these presentations, an opportunity to really reshape the culture. Be a good steward or a caretaker to pursue your talents and be good to your neighbor and to the house that God has given us to share, earth. And never, never be afraid to responsibly enjoy and share the fruits of your work. I have been blessed with the opportunity to serve others, and I will refer to that in my attempt to answer the question at hand. As a Catholic businessman, public policy maker, and non-for-profit advocate, I have had the opportunity to make decisions that actually test some of the basic principles and values that we have been hearing of today. And I don't mean this in theory. What do you do if you are part of an organization that is trying to tie development to abortion accessibility? Or what do you do when donors to developing nations condition aid to accepting theories that make people a commodity? That's the reality that is happening out there in many of the global organizations. And one has to be very clear and oppose or make your point without being ashamed. I did that while I was at the World Bank, and I was attacked for that. They were even saying, you know, we go to Dr. Daboub's office and there is a picture of Virgin Mary. That was the big attack. You know, I said, I don't have one picture of Virgin Mary. I have several around my office and many more at home. But that is part of the reality that takes place out there. I was also attacked when the World Bank wanted to go beyond the Kairos consensus. And there was a loan to be given to the country of Madagascar, and when you see at the conditionality, that is, I'll give you this money if you do A, B, and C, see what a series of indicators that would add questions to the clinics and hospitals in that country. Questions like, can you please confirm that 15 minutes before the sexual act, the person actually used this? So how can anybody use that metric in a truthful manner, in a scientific manner? And so just by asking sometimes the questions, you actually reveal some of the intentions behind some of these endeavors. And this applies to us every day. It doesn't matter from what country we come from or what kind of background we have. Every day, it doesn't matter what you do, one faces decisions and the consequences of those decisions. Whether it is about new investments in one of our companies or whether it is about privatizing a state-owned company, which I did for 12 years when I was in government in my country without belonging to any political party, or endorsing or rejecting policies in global institutions that impact millions of people, or whether it is about raising the awareness about the urgent need to adapt to climate fluctuations from the perspective of society or other organizations. We are responsible and accountable for what we do and for what we fail to do. And if you are attracted to the idea of saving lives and improving livelihoods, let me give you some facts that I hope will help you as you decide in your path going forward professionally and personally. ND, that stands for Notre Dame Gain Scientists, have calculated that people living in countries like the Cardinal, Ghana, or my country, El Salvador, have 10 times more chance of being affected by a climate disaster than those in wealthy countries each year. Increasingly, droughts, food security, superstorms, and civil conflicts impact poverty and injustice. Some $100 billion per year for the next 30 years, that's a generation, are needed just for developing countries to reach the level of resilience than OECD countries have today. It will take about 100 years to reach that level of development. Therefore, leapfrogging is crucial. We can't wait 100 years. And if we let and wait for global organizations or for the politicians to make things happen, we're going to wait 100 years. It has to come from the innovation and the creativeness that individuals and the private sector, together with civil society, can actually accelerate this process. The magnitude of the process of the program is so big that we really need to get as many sectors involved. And towards the end of my remarks, I'll give you some additional numbers that I want you to take home. That's what I'm leaving them towards the end. So after these introductory remarks, allow me to first set the stage based on my humble understanding of the work of the three popes, Pope Leo XIII, San Juan Pablo II, and Papa Francisco. And second, I will try to do that if technology doesn't fail. I'll show you what am I doing with other people in order to put into practice what we are discussing here or what we are preaching here. Pope Francis has started a revolution. Building on the work of Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, and St. John Paul II, Centésimos Annos, Francisco's latest encyclical, Laudato Si, shows that there is a third way to take a look at one of the most controversial issues of our time, the link between faith, business, and the environment. After all the political correctness that limits an open and frank discussion, it is no longer taboo to actually talk about human beings. In my view, Francis has offered a constructive space between those who believe that human beings are solely responsible for destroying the environment and those who believe that there are no environmental problems at all. See, up to a few years ago, there were only two choices. You either accepted that there was man-made global warming and the world was ending tomorrow, which if it was ending tomorrow, why even bother about it? Or you didn't accept that. For example, some politicians and movie stars from Hollywood view of the world focuses on polar bears. One could argue that that's a view against human beings. In this view, the world will be a better place without any humans, or at least as few as possible. Francis, on the other hand, is pro-humans. Pope Francis highlights human dignity, part of which is spiritual or faith-based, and part of which comes from individuals taking destiny into their own hands. From my experience, the famous three critical elements define dignity. One, a job. With work, with a job, an individual has responsibility and accountability about his and her own success. It stimulates freedom to create and innovate. It allows to move geographically from challenged places to safer ones. It provides upward mobility and means to prosper. It helps save lives and improve livelihoods. Two, the environment. Earth provides the means for our mundane existence. And this is not new to Christians. We understand the importance of protecting it. God tells us about that in Genesis. We also understand that any human being has the capacity to produce more than what she or he can consume. As a matter of fact, can produce much more even for others. 3, faith. We believe that success on earth has to be within the context of our relationship with God in order to be welcome in heaven. This relationship is reflected in the love for others. These are not strange topics to Catholics. The earth is a gift from God, a gift that needs to be protected. A job, as stated in the parable of the talents, creates wealth. And you are asked, not invited, you are asked not to bury your talents, but to multiply them. So being successful in business is not a bad thing. The results of hard work are a way to fulfill one of God's mandates to us. And faith is the glue that keeps it all together. Faith is about the principles and values that distinguish human beings from animals, polar bears from babies. Pope Francis recognizes this. In his letter to Daboub, as stated by the Cardinal, Pope Francis encouraged, in the letter of the Pope to Daboub 2 years ago, Pope Francis encouraged the leaders of the free world to use their talents and their innovation and creativeness to resolve the challenges of a fast-evolving world, where the great trends coming from the effects of weather-related events, population shifts, and economic development cannot and will not likely be resolved by politicians or global organizations alone. It is primarily the private sector that has the means to find these solutions and requires the participation of civil society. There are some quotes from the popes that will be distributed. I think most of you will know them. But based on those quotes from the 3 encyclicas, it helps me understand the connection between spirituality and the world we live in and how to use our time on earth to enter into heaven. Leo XIII declares private property as a fundamental human right. He also suggests that solutions to the most pertinent problems in society usually start in the private sector. Prosperity comes from the human ecology and from our environment, from the fruit of our labor. There is an intrinsic unity between human ecology and the environment. They are interconnected. We have a right and a duty to our land, to our ecology, to create and maintain a healthy ecology. All is rooted in the spiritual foundation of human existence. By the same token, St. John Paul II in Centesimus Annus tells us that we are and we grow our own human ecology, that we have a choice, being and growing the culture of life versus the desire to have and to enjoy. We are all called to be cooperators of God, not tyrants. There is a connection of the human being and natural environment. We are both endowed with moral and natural structures. We live that by living that truth. Pope Francis, and I won't go into too many details because it has been amply quoted already or mentioned, but in Laudato Si I have a couple of quotes that I like to read to you. And I open the quote. The destruction of the human environment is extremely serious, not only because God has entrusted the world to us men and women, but because human life is itself a gift which must be defended from various forms of debasement. Every effort to protect and improve our world entails profound changes in lifestyles, models of production and consumption, and established structures of power which today govern societies. Francis points at Benedict's Book of Nature. He observed that the world cannot be analyzed by isolating only one of its aspects, since the Book of Nature is one indivisible, and includes the environment, life, sexuality, the family, social relations, and so forth. The human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation unless we attend to causes related to human and social degradation. A sense of deep communion with the rest of nature cannot be real if our hearts lack tenderness, compassion, and concern for our fellow human beings. It is clearly inconsistent to combat trafficking in endangered species while remaining completely indifferent to human trafficking, unconcerned about the poor, or undertaking to destroy another human being deemed unwanted. This compromises the very meaning of our struggle for the sake of the environment. It is no coincidence that in the canticle in which St. Francis praises God for his creature, he goes on to say, "Praise be you, my Lord, through those who give pardon for your love." Everything is connected. Concern for the environment does need to be joined to a sincere love for our fellow human beings and an unwavering commitment to resolving many of today's problems. Laudato Si connects directly with the work I'm doing at NDGAIN, and I take one final quote: "Productive diversification offers the fullest possibility to human ingenuity to create and innovate, while at the same time protecting the environment and creating more sources of employment." Also, Laudato Si is very frank, and I don't know how much the Cardinal had to do with this, but it says, and I quote, "The Church does not presume to settle scientific questions or to replace politics," end quote. Nor does the Pope share that view of many famous people, including those in Washington, some in Washington and some in the movie stars, about their passion for polar bears over babies. He puts human beings at the center. Final quote: "It is troubling that when certain ecological movements defend the integrity of the environment, rightly demanding that certain limits be set on scientific research, they sometimes fail to apply those same principles to human life. There is a tendency to justify transgressing all boundaries when experimentation is carried out on living human embryos. We forget that the inalienable worth of human person transcends his or her degree of development. A technology severed from ethics will not easily be able by itself to limit its own power," end quote. So the first point I have attempted to make is that throughout time, the Church has been consistent about the important balance between humans, earth, business, and faith. My second point is to offer possible solutions to the question, how can we bring these concepts to our daily life? How can one contribute to this more harmonious society where business, environment, and faith are intertwined? In the last 8 minutes, 9, I'd like to share with you what we are doing. I'm the founding CEO of the Global Adaptation Institute, now ND for Notre Dame, Global Adaptation Institute, because we have now moved it and it's housed at Notre Dame. And as a former member of government in my country and managing director of the World Bank, but also as a business person, I'm really not interested in the debate about climate change, but rather about the pragmatic solutions that are needed to today's problems of floodings or droughts, of lack of food in many parts of the world. And so what we are trying to do at the Global Adaptation Institute is to raise the awareness about the urgent need to adapt to the effects of changes in the climate, population shifts, economic growth, and other major trends. And we do that, again, the trilogy, by doing 3 things. First, education. Second, metrics. And third, prices. On education, we share experiences, interact with scientists, with public policymakers, and business leaders in order to help move the needle towards a more resilient society. Metrics. We believe that if you cannot measure it, you will never know if you're going in the right direction. So we develop an index of over 180 countries in terms of their vulnerability. That's how weak countries are in terms of their exposure to natural disasters, to the lack of access to water or infrastructure that is needed for people not only I've been hearing the story about not being able to fish, not having the pole to fish, I will add, sometimes the problem is that there is not a market where you can sell your fish. But we also measure readiness. That is, how enabled is the environment in these 180 countries in order to attract investments that will reduce the vulnerabilities that exist in our countries. And readiness includes governance, economic development, and social development. We also measure the conditions that will make an investor decide between, and these are real cases, between investing, for example, in Botswana or Tanzania, or keeping their headquarters in Venezuela or moving them to Panama, and not exclusively using one metric, which is usually return on investment, but a more integral measurement which also takes into account the community in which these companies will evolve. And third, prices. We recognize decision makers, scientists, public sector officials, and civil society organizations that are contributing in their own field to achieve an integral process that focuses on people. An integral bottom line means making money and doing good. Keep in mind that it is not compassion unless it really works. We can be talking about being compassionate, but if we do not have the means and we don't have the heart and the charity to share it, then change is not going to take place, certainly not change in the right direction. We have data for 180 countries for the past 20 years. Every year we put the index out there, and it is an open source that is available to everybody. You can slice and dice the information in many, many ways. If technology allows me, I'll just put it in the screen. This is interactive, so one can play with it. I won't do it because of lack of time, but one can see in the first screen a map of all the countries around the world, and you can just point at any one country. I don't know which one I'm pointing out. Afghanistan. There is a ranking, there is a rating, and there are 24 metrics that tell you how that country is doing in terms of the vulnerabilities to the effects of climate change, access to water, access to infrastructure, access to education, and it also tells you how ready this country is to attract investment. This is a tool that when I meet with members of the board of directors of very large companies, but also small companies, they are usually asking about the return on investment, but there is always one or two members of the board that say, what else is there? What are some of the risks that we are taking, political or in terms of impacting or affecting negatively or positively when they exist in the communities where we are going to be in? And so we measure how vulnerable societies are in terms of access to basic public services like water, infrastructure to connect the poorest villages with the market where their products can be sold, availability of food for people in need, but also the exposure to droughts and floods and the access to health and education. We measure how enabled is the environment for the private sector to invest in those areas and make it attractive, which entails the need for institutional capacity, political stability, and social policies that are conducive to good health and good education. A ranking is made, and countries are encouraged to climb that ranking by virtue of the public policies that are implemented. We believe that by having more informed people, better decisions will be made. We would like to think that our contribution is both pragmatic and positive. An effective way to lessen the harm from natural disasters, whether due to climate fluctuations or other causes, is through the improvement in the resilience and adaptability of vulnerable populations, and innovation to address prevalent and emerging risks. This, in turn, requires policies and institutions favorable to investments in the areas where the needs are the greatest. And these policies require not only local and foreign investment, but also the investment from many of the global institutions that are otherwise misallocating resources or putting some conditionalities like the ones I described at the beginning. Current climate impact numbers might surprise you. Just 11 years ago, Katrina hit several states in the south. Over 3 years ago, we have Superstorm Sandy crashing into the northeast of the United States, showing Americans the need to climate action. Sandy remains one of the most expensive extreme weather events in history, costing the government and corporations over $40 billion. And this year, end of last year and beginning of this year, the largest drought-declared area in California has taken place with an economic cost of over $2 billion. This year, in Washington State, California, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, and Alaska, there are 8.5 million acres of forest that have burned. That's about 1/3 the size of the state of Indiana. But extreme weather events like bigger, more destructive hurricanes, hotter, longer droughts, record-breaking wildfires, and biblical floods are not just the domain of the United States, nor are they new. Every 600 million years, we pass through similar events. There has been an ice age, there has been a warm age, and the world is most likely going to continue to go in that direction. That doesn't mean we need to accept that, or that we should cross our arms and do nothing about it. The world, just last year, mourned the loss of over 8,000 people from weather-related disasters and about $91 billion in cost. The World Health Organization estimates that over 250,000 people, in addition, will be dying every year in the next 30 years due to these kind of events. And rising temperatures and variable precipitations are likely to decrease the production of staple foods, in the case of Africa, by about 50% less. In conclusion, while the causes and consequences of climate fluctuations are complex and hard to pinpoint, and the concept of climate change itself can be hard to define, we do find ourselves in a situation where natural disasters, when they happen, often cause more damage than ever before, especially in the poorer areas of the world. This could be because the infrastructure to run modern societies is much more sophisticated and expensive than ever before, and when damaged, the consequences are obviously much more severe. It seems that in these circumstances, the integral development of the poorer countries is even more urgent. During my term as managing director of the World Bank Group, I had the opportunity to work in over 110 countries, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Latin America. And the daily life of many of the people I met, including those in my own country, El Salvador, starts by walking 3 miles to collect water, continues with a half-a-day work cutting trees to cook their food, and ends with dangerous smoke from the candles that allow children to study when it's dark at night. This has been the reality for centuries. I'm sure that all of us in this room would like to change this for the better. As an illustration, and I know I'm a few minutes over time, excluding South Africa, less than 25% of the population of Africa has access to electricity. And so the question I have is, what options do they have? Can we prohibit them not to use their natural resources like oil, gas, coal, air, water, and other means that they have? No, we can't do that. We can't ask them to stay 100 years behind everybody else. What we need to do is work with them to find that combination of technology and capital that will allow a better use of those resources that actually exist, so that they no longer have to read their books at night with candles that produce a lot of smoke. Let's not forget that we are all about human beings. The link between them is the possibility of saving lives and improving livelihoods. The Catholic Church during the last 125 years has adequately defined this and defended property rights and the right to benefit from it, as stated by Leo. It has also warned about totalitarian systems that privilege the state over individuals, as John Paul II lived in his own country. And more recently, it has a clear message about balancing these factors, including by protecting the life of the unborn, as Francis has insisted. We have a new playing field that Francis has carved out for us. We look at the future of our human ecology, where life is valued and we are good stewards of God's gifts. It is now up to each of us, business leaders and leaders from the public sector and civil society, to pick the areas where we can make the largest and most significant contribution and just do it. Muchas gracias.
Dr. Daboub, thank you so very much for that challenging and also enlightening talk. I have to admit, you know, that last thing of just do it at the end is true. To select, you know, an area where we might be able to make a difference, to bring, you know, the combination of technology and knowledge to these world problems, especially these world environmental problems and these world problems of environment and adaptation to global change. I mean, global change is huge. It's not just environment. It's population centers are moving. It's refugees. It's so many different kinds of challenges. But I think the first step that you have at least given us to do to figure out, well, what could we do internationally? Where could we make a difference? Where could we take our special kind of technology or our special kind of business knowledge or business acumen or entrepreneurial ability? Where could we take it to a place where we could make a really useful contribution and something that would improve, you know, global conditions as best we can? I think going to your website is a really good start. I think every single one of us believe what you said at the very beginning. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And I think those metrics are incredibly important. Frankly, I've not heard of the Notre Dame Center yet for a global adaptation, but I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to look at that website. I'm very interested in your 27 metrics. I'm very interested in knowing, you know, how that applies to various countries throughout the world, and how that applies to the kinds of technologies and entrepreneurial and business expertise that might be used to solve those problems. Now, the first thing we need to do is get the knowledge, and you have provided that for us with your center and with your talk today, and especially in the inspiration that calls us to find the place where we might make the most difference and to respond to it. Thank you again, Dr. Daboub, for everything you're doing, not just for us here in the conference, but to make a huge difference to global adaptation throughout the world. Well, that brings you know, an end today to today's activities. There will be a mass over at the hotel at 6:15. Since I'm the presider at that mass, if you beat me there and I'm not there at 6:15 for the St. Patrick's Day Mass, would you please let them know I'm on my way? Also, after the Mass, dinner is on your own, and we will resume our conference tomorrow. Please continue. I think these speakers are just fantastic. We'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have fine speakers, another panel to conclude our deliberations here. Thanks. Oh.
Dinner is on us. It's St. Patrick's dinner. Everyone is invited.
Oh.
At the hotel.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't see. Dinner is on us.
6:30 reception, 7:30 dinner.
At the same place as last night?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very, very much. And again, cigars afterwards. So, what do I know? Anyway, if the mass is at 6:15 and the reception starts at 6:30, you may have to choose between what Cardinal Turkson just called spiritual versus merely corporeal benefits. Anyway, thanks everybody. See you tomorrow.